The alien forces touched down with thunderous force, the ground shuddering beneath their massive landing ships. The air was filled with an eerie hum as the alien commanders emerged, armored in dark, gleaming plates, their expressions calm yet brimming with the arrogance of conquerors. One of them, taller and broader than the rest, surveyed the land through a visor that scanned Earth's surface for any resistance. He laughed, a rough, guttural sound that rippled through the lines of alien troops standing at attention. "This is Earth?" he scoffed. "It's smaller, weaker, and barely worth the fuel we wasted." Beside him, a second commander nodded, eyes narrowed. "Their defenses won't hold for long. Let's keep it quick. I'd rather be back at the fortress by nightfall." The command was given, and alien scouts spread out, searching the perimeter, scouring every nook and cranny. Their orders were simple: clear every path, silence any threat, and make Earth another forgotten speck in their galactic conquest. Not far away, cloaked in the shadows of a dense tree line, an Earth figure observed. He was alone, wrapped in dark clothing that blended with his surroundings, his face hidden under a hood that cast a deep shadow over his eyes. This lone figure moved without a sound, his steps as light as falling leaves. He watched as the alien troops advanced, their armor reflecting the midday sun in cruel, blinding glints. In their arrogance, they hadn't even considered they might be watched. He adjusted his stance, his hand resting on the hilt of a weapon. But this was no blade, no gun. It was a tool crafted with precision, silent as a whisper, designed for one purpose only: to end lives without a trace. It was a ninja's weapon, honed through centuries of discipline and training. He was here for one reason: to send a message from Earth. And he would do it alone. The alien commanders grew restless as they waited for their scouts' reports. The one who had laughed earlier clicked his mandibles in frustration. "What's taking them so long?" he demanded, voice echoing through his helmet's translator. "They should have returned by now. The humans can't even organize a proper defense. This shouldn't take more than a few minutes." Another commander shrugged, dismissing the concern. "Relax. Earth is underprepared, under-equipped, and out of time. We'll march over them like we've done with countless worlds before." But at the far edge of their formation, near the perimeter the scouts had set, a lone alien soldier stumbled. There was a flash, too quick to be seen, and he fell, his body crumpling without a sound. The other soldiers took no notice. They had no reason to suspect anything yet. The line of fallen aliens grew as the ninja moved through the perimeter, unseen and unheard. He was a shadow in the wind, as fleeting as a gust that brushed the leaves. His movements were precise, his strikes silent, every step calculated and deliberate. Back at the command center, the alien leaders waited impatiently for news. It was the smaller of the commanders who finally sensed something amiss. "Do you hear that?" he asked, scanning the clearing. "Or rather, do you hear what's missing?" The others frowned, but he continued. "Silence. Our perimeter should be alive with the sounds of communication and movement." He activated his visor, scanning for heat signatures, but the display was empty. The silence deepened, heavy and eerie, as if the air itself had been stilled by an unseen force. One of the commanders opened a channel, calling for the scouts to report. Static replied. No voices, no movement, just silence. The towering commander snarled, his pride bruised. "Someone, something, is out there. I want this intruder found. Dispatch a squad and comb the area." Earth's lone ninja had anticipated this reaction. He watched as the squad set out, moving methodically, cautiously now, their confidence tempered by the uncertainty growing in their ranks. He slipped deeper into the shadows, waiting, timing his next move with the practiced patience of a predator. In the silence, his mind was as still as the forest around him. Every breath, every beat of his heart was steady. He was not just one with the shadows, he was the shadows. And in that silence, his mission became clear. He wasn't here to fight a war. He was here to prove a point, to show these invaders that Earth was more than just a target. It was a land guarded by people who were not only warriors but shadows themselves, spirits woven from silence and resilience. One by one, the alien soldiers moved forward, each casting wary glances into the trees, as if expecting something to leap out at them. But nothing came, and slowly, their shoulders relaxed. They began to think they had been tricked, that this was some human attempt to instill fear. Then, out of nowhere, a figure descended from above. There was no sound, no cry of alarm, just a swift, precise motion. The ninja struck with calculated efficiency, his blades slicing through armor with ease. Another alien soldier fell. The remaining troops spun around, weapons raised, but they saw nothing. Only the rustle of leaves. A trickle of panic slipped into their ranks as they whispered among themselves, wondering if they were truly facing an army of invisible warriors. In truth, it was just one man, moving like a ghost, dismantling them piece by piece. The ninja slipped away again, unseen, as the commanders barked furious orders, their voices shaking with anger and fear. They had come to Earth expecting a quick and decisive conquest, but here they were, facing a silent reaper who seemed to know every move before they made it. For the first time, they felt doubt. Their armor, their weapons, their numbers, none of it mattered against this unseen force. The lone ninja watched from a distance, noting how the aliens had begun to falter, how fear had crept into their eyes. He could sense their frustration, feel the weight of their confusion. And he let them feel it, feeding their dread with every calculated disappearance, every life taken without warning. He was not just an enemy, he was a reminder of Earth's spirit, its refusal to bend, to break, or to be conquered. As night began to fall, the alien commanders huddled together, their arrogance replaced by tension. They whispered among themselves, concocting desperate plans to root out the intruder. But Earth's ninja was already gone, melting into the darkness as silently as he had come. The alien soldiers tensed, fingers hovering over the triggers of their weapons, eyes scanning every shadow that shifted in the dense forest. The command had been clear: find the intruder, eliminate the threat. But as they crept through the trees, all they found was an unsettling silence that seemed to press in from every direction. Their breaths grew shallow, their movements hesitant, as if they feared even their own footsteps would reveal them. One soldier broke the silence with a muttered curse, frustrated by the stillness. But before he could finish, a glint of metal flashed, slicing through the dim light. He went down without a sound, his body crumpling into the foliage. His comrades spun around, rifles raised, searching for the source. There was nothing, just a vague shimmer where he'd stood, then silence once more. The ninja watched from above, crouched on a thick tree branch, his presence blended seamlessly into the shadows. This forest was his ally, his cover, his weapon. He had chosen every position carefully, each step calculated to maximize confusion and terror. The alien strength lay in brute force, in technology that could overpower cities and worlds. But they had never fought like this, never faced an enemy who refused to engage by their rules. He waited, watching as the soldiers regrouped, their leader gesturing frantically as he barked orders. 2 more soldiers advanced cautiously, their eyes darting. They moved together, scanning each other's backs. A wall of caution built between them. It was a mistake. From behind, the ninja descended, swift and deadly, his blade barely visible as it sliced through armor and flesh. The soldiers collapsed. Only a faint rustle marked his retreat as he vanished once again into the trees. Panic began to creep into the ranks. Their shouts grew louder, angrier, as they called out names, voices strained. They had come here as conquerors, with confidence as thick as their armor, but now each shadow held the promise of death. The ninja knew fear was his most potent weapon. Every movement, every strike was timed to keep them guessing, to make them doubt not just their senses but their very purpose for being here. An alien soldier at the edge of the formation raised his visor to wipe sweat from his brow, muttering something in his native tongue. His voice was shaky, the tone betraying a fear he could no longer suppress. His hand trembled, gripping his rifle like a lifeline. He turned, glancing over his shoulder at a sound, a leaf crunching underfoot, perhaps. But it was too late. The ninja struck swiftly, a blur of motion, and the alien's body dropped, lifeless, into the underbrush. The ninja slipped back into the darkness, leaving the group further fractured. One of the alien commanders, a seasoned warrior who had seen dozens of battlefields, paced furiously, his voice breaking as he shouted orders to the remaining soldiers. He could feel the invisible noose tightening around his team, feel the controls slipping from his grasp. In his mind, he was running through every tactic, every protocol drilled into him for decades. But none of it applied here. Their scanners showed nothing, their weapons were ineffective, and their formations fell apart with every strike. A squad of 5 regrouped, standing back to back, their rifles aimed outward in a defensive circle. They whispered to each other, trying to bolster confidence, to remind themselves of their training. But in the quiet that followed, a lone shuriken flew from the shadows, embedding itself in one soldier's visor. He dropped, clutching at his face. His comrades recoiled, disoriented, as the ninja's calculated ambush scattered them further. Only 3 remained. Their breaths were rapid, eyes wild, adrenaline pushing them to the edge of their sanity. They backed away, but everywhere they looked, it was the same: shadows, silence, an enemy they could not see. The lone warrior was no longer just a man to them, he was a ghost, a living nightmare. The ninja observed their every movement, feeling their desperation as a palpable energy in the air. He moved again, swift as wind, bypassing the last soldiers to target their communication devices. With a flick of his wrist, he disabled the comm links. The silence became complete, oppressive, the kind that weighed heavy on the soul. Cut off from each other, from their leaders, the soldiers were trapped, left only with their growing dread. Back at the alien command center, the main commander smashed his fist against the console, frustrated by the static in his ear. His squad leaders were supposed to be feeding him updates, supposed to be mapping out the terrain, identifying the source of this human resistance. Instead, he was greeted by silence. He glanced around at the officers, each face reflecting his own worry. "We underestimated them," he said through clenched teeth. This is not like any other species. They don't engage, they don't retreat, they haunt us." One officer nodded, his expression grave. "It's like they're toying with us, Commander. Our forces are scattered. If we keep losing men at this rate..." The commander waved a hand, dismissing the unspoken fear. "We are the conquerors. We crush, we destroy. We don't fear shadows and whispers." But even as he said it, he could see the doubt flickering in his own eyes reflected in the faces around him. He clenched his fists, ordering more troops forward, promising them their armor would protect them. He would not show weakness, not to himself, not to his soldiers. And yet, beneath the steel of his resolve, a sliver of fear twisted, growing with every moment of silence from the field. The ninja sensed a shift in the air, felt the new wave of reinforcements approaching. His work was far from done. They would throw more bodies at him, believing they could overwhelm him with numbers. But he was patient, precise, undeterred by the escalation. He was here not for the glory of a battle won, but to teach them a lesson in humility, to show them that Earth was more than they could ever comprehend. He moved with renewed purpose, each step as silent as the first. He was Earth's answer to their arrogance, a reminder that this planet held secrets, strengths, and defenders they could not hope to conquer. One by one, the new troops fell, their bodies joining the growing trail that marked the ninja's path through the forest. And with each life he took, each silence he created, the legend of Earth's lone guardian grew. The commanders would never understand, not fully. They would return to their ships one day, their ranks thinned and their spirits broken, bearing tales of a land where shadows took lives, where silence was a weapon, and where a single man had turned their might into a memory of fear. And as the ninja disappeared once more into the trees, he knew he had given them a warning they would never forget. Earth was not just a target. It was a home guarded by forces they could never comprehend, a home worth fighting for until the last breath. The alien commanders seethed with frustration. Troop after troop vanished into the thick, unyielding forest, disappearing without a trace. The once quiet grumbling of the soldiers had turned into full-blown panic, spreading like wildfire through their ranks. Alien pride and discipline fractured as they realized they were not simply facing a rebellious world, but a cunning, unseen warrior who had turned their own rules against them. In a last-ditch attempt to regain control, the commanders brought out their most advanced scanners and drones. They hovered in the air, buzzing softly, their lenses and sensors scanning for any sign of movement. Thermal imaging, motion detectors, heartbeat analyzers, every piece of advanced technology they had, now fixed on the forest. They were confident this would end the torment, that the lone ghost haunting them would be dragged into the open by their superior machinery. They could not imagine a situation where technology failed them. But the ninja had prepared for this. In silence, he slipped through the branches, moving with careful precision. He had studied Earth's terrain his whole life, and he knew its secrets well. He anticipated the sweep of each scanner, the range of each drone. When the drones neared his position, he became one with the foliage, blending so perfectly into his surroundings that even the most advanced sensors could not separate him from the forest itself. It was not magic, it was mastery. The alien commanders watched their screens, irritation mounting as the drones showed nothing but trees, bushes, and the occasional animal darting through the undergrowth. They could hardly comprehend that a single human, with no armor, no machinery, could elude every measure they threw at him. Furious, the commanders directed the troops to close in tighter, pushing them deeper into the forest, forcing them into areas where they knew the enemy must be hiding. The soldiers obeyed, moving cautiously through the thick foliage, their breaths shallow. They had long abandoned any attempt to communicate with one another, every sound seeming to echo louder in their own minds. They glanced nervously at each other, trying to convince themselves that the ninja was just a man, mortal and fallible. But in their hearts, they had begun to fear him as something more, a phantom, a vengeful spirit of this world. As the squad advanced, the ninja struck. Swiftly, he threw a handful of pebbles in different directions, the tiny sounds bouncing off trees and rocks, creating faint echoes. The aliens reacted instantly, spinning around, firing blindly into the shadows. The forest lit up with flashes of energy blasts, the sound of their own panic a harsh contrast to the otherwise stillness of the night. The ninja smiled to himself as he observed from above. He watched the squad's frantic movements, the chaos he had sown blooming like a carefully tended garden of fear. Then, with deliberate calm, he dropped down silently, slipping through the shadows until he was within striking distance of the nearest alien. A swift strike, precise and silent, and the soldier crumpled without a sound. The others had no time to react, each one taken down with calculated precision before they even realized the threat was among them. Back at the command center, the senior alien commander's patience finally broke. He slammed his fist against the control panel, bellowing, "He's playing with us! This human knows our tactics, knows our technology!" His voice crackled through the intercoms as he addressed the scattered squads. "Stop looking for him! Flush him out! Burn the entire area if you must!" The order was met with silence. The remaining troops could feel the helplessness of their leaders. They too had lost faith in their own power. But they followed the command, reluctantly raising their weapons and setting the forest alight. Flames licked at trees, spreading quickly, but the dense foliage made it difficult to control the blaze. Smoke began to curl upward, creating a thick fog that blanketed the area, clouding vision even more. The ninja watched as the flames grew, his heart steady. The inferno posed no threat to him. He moved swiftly, navigating away from the fire, using the smoke as cover to infiltrate deeper into the command's defenses. As the fire expanded, confusion followed. The flames blocked sight lines, and the smoke disrupted communication. Soldiers scrambled blindly, caught between fear of their unseen enemy and the threat of the growing blaze. In the chaos, the ninja struck again, this time targeting the communication relays. With silent movements, he dismantled their network, cutting off any link to the command center. The command center screens flickered, then went black. The commanders were plunged into silence, unable to see or hear their troops, trapped in their fortress of technology with no way to control the battlefield. The lone human had rendered them blind, deaf, and utterly vulnerable. They could feel the weight of isolation settling around them, their arrogance dissolving into desperation. The senior commander called for reinforcements, but the message died in his throat as he realized there was no one left to respond. Meanwhile, the soldiers trapped in the forest turned on each other, paranoia seizing their minds as every shadow seemed to hold the ninja's blade. Their discipline crumbled. They fired wildly, each movement a frantic attempt to defend themselves from an enemy they could not see. In their frenzy, some even began to flee, abandoning their posts, stumbling blindly through the smoke. The ninja saw his work taking shape. He hadn't simply taken their lives, he had dismantled their will, exposing the hollowness of their power. This was more than just a victory. It was a message, a warning to any who would think Earth was an easy conquest. The commanders, their confidence shattered, huddled together in silence. They were far from the conquering lords they had been when they'd first landed. The air, thick with smoke and failure, settled around them, weighing down every boast they had once held so proudly. They understood, now, that they faced not a savage world but a place of spirit, resilience, and an intelligence they had failed to respect. Outside, the ninja slipped away, his task nearly complete. He left behind a forest scarred by the flames the aliens had ignited, a land touched by their arrogance, yet standing strong. The fire, like the invasion, would pass. But the fear he had sown would linger. The ninja's figure melted into the last whispers of smoke, vanishing without a trace, leaving only the quiet that had been his true weapon all along. He knew the alien commanders would return to their worlds with stories of Earth, stories of a silent defender, a ghost who haunted their steps and laid waste to their technology without ever revealing his face. They would fear the shadows of Earth long after the last flame had died, haunted by the legend of the lone ninja who had turned their might into ashes. And with that, the ninja disappeared, leaving the forest and the sky untouched, silent, and unbroken. The remaining alien commanders regrouped, huddling close, their once commanding voices now laced with fear. They whispered, wary of every shadow, haunted by the silence that had swallowed their forces. The once bustling control center now felt like a cage, their technology reduced to powerless metal. Nothing they had brought could detect, trap, or even glimpse the enemy that had torn through their ranks with nothing but shadows and silence. All they knew was that a single, silent figure was out there, watching, waiting for them to make their next move. They could no longer pretend this was a standard operation. Their arrogance had been replaced by a brittle dread, a gnawing realization that they had underestimated not just the planet, but its people. And this lone warrior, this phantom they could not touch, had proved that their numbers and technology meant nothing here. The tallest commander, who had been leading the mission, looked to the others, his face a mask of forced calm. We regroup. Set up a new perimeter around the command center. We'll hold our ground and eliminate him here. His voice was firm, but even he couldn't mask the quiver that snuck in, the doubt that had found a home in his heart. They fortified the base, positioning soldiers in every entryway, every corner. Their movements were rigid, like actors forced into roles they no longer believed in. They bristled with weapons, every one of them trained on the periphery, as though expecting the ninja to charge in recklessly. But there was no sound, no indication of approach. The quiet stretched, tightening like a noose around their confidence. Every gust of wind, every leaf that fell, made them tense, weapons clutched tighter, breaths held. Then, suddenly, all the lights in the command center went dark. A hum rose from the alien machinery as each system failed in succession. The emergency lights flickered on, casting a dim, blood-red glow over the room. Shadows lengthened, flickering across the walls, deepening their fear. It was as if the darkness itself had become an accomplice to the intruder, a silent force mocking their inability to see what lay in front of them. Panic rippled through the ranks as the soldiers glanced around, their wide eyes filled with alarm. They called out, each voice more desperate than the last, the weight of their vulnerability crushing whatever discipline they had left. And in that red-lit darkness, the ninja struck. He moved like liquid shadow, weaving in and out of the narrow pools of light. His steps were soundless, precise, each movement a masterstroke in a dance they could neither see nor understand. The first to fall was a soldier stationed at the main corridor. He blinked, confused, and then collapsed as if sleep had simply claimed him mid-watch. The others gasped, shifting to cover the empty space he left, their weapons raised and trembling. But their movements were uncoordinated, their aim hesitant. Fear had robbed them of their purpose. They were no longer soldiers. They were prey, cornered by something they couldn't comprehend. The ninja moved closer, his path curving and undetectable, his strikes swift, exacting. With each silent fall, the remaining soldiers felt their own doom creeping in, as if the shadows themselves were pulling them down one by one. The commanders watched, frozen in horror, unable to comprehend how their elite troops, trained to conquer entire worlds, were helpless against a single, unarmed man. This was not warfare as they knew it. This was something far older, far deeper, and they were out of their depth. The lead commander broke first. With a shaking hand, he activated his personal weapon, a rare piece of technology with the firepower to vaporize anything within its range. He aimed wildly, his breath coming in short gasps. The ninja stood just out of sight, a flicker of movement that teased the commander's failing vision. The commander fired, the weapon roaring in a flash of blue light that tore through the wall in a burst of scorched metal. But he hit nothing. His target was already gone. The ninja moved behind him, stepping so quietly that not even the commander's advanced hearing could detect him. He waited, letting the silence fill the commander's mind like a shadow, feeding his terror. When the commander turned, he was met with nothing but empty air. The weapon slipped from his grasp as his hands trembled, and the ninja struck, a single swift motion that left him slumping to the floor in silence. The other commanders watched in shock, unable to reconcile what they saw with what they knew. It wasn't supposed to be possible. This level of skill, this mastery over both space and fear. Their conqueror's pride melted away, leaving only the primal, instinctive fear that every creature feels in the presence of death. One of them bolted, his breath ragged as he scrambled toward the exit, ignoring the silent accusations of cowardice from his comrades. He dashed into the open, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow, searching for an escape. But the forest had become a labyrinth, a twisting maze that turned him back toward the command center no matter which way he ran. Panic overcame him, and he collapsed to his knees, hands gripping his helmet as if to block out the crushing silence around him. The ninja appeared, silent as the fog that settled over the forest floor. He stood just out of reach, his gaze steady, his body relaxed. The alien's breathing slowed, as if entranced by the calm of the figure before him. Then, in a single movement, the ninja lifted a hand, and the alien fell silent forever. Back in the command center, the final commander held his weapon close, his eyes darting around the room. He was alone now, surrounded by the red-tinged memories of his once glorious forces, reduced to whispers in the dark. His mind raced with images of home, of the empire he'd once served with unwavering loyalty. Now he was just a man, stripped of rank and armor, facing a force he could not name. The ninja stepped forward, his face still hidden in shadow. The commander's last breath caught in his throat as he saw the figure before him, realizing he was not looking at a mere soldier, but a force, a guardian born of Earth itself. This was not an enemy to be vanquished, but a spirit forged by the land they had tried to conquer. A final, terrible truth dawned in his mind: he would not leave this world as a conqueror. He would be a ghost, lost in the silence that had taken his men, his empire, his pride. The ninja moved with purpose, his steps slow and final, as he crossed the distance between them. The commander could only watch, paralyzed, as the shadow drew closer, the silent reckoning of a world that refused to be owned. In his last moment, the commander understood what he had failed to see: Earth was not a target, not a prize. It was a land of strength, of resilience, of people who fought without weapons, who could turn even the quiet into an unstoppable force. And as the ninja vanished into the shadows, the command center fell silent once more. The story was complete, a warning delivered, a message sent across the stars to any who would dare follow. Earth was guarded by more than soldiers. It was guarded by silence, by shadows, by the unbreakable will of its people. The alien command center lay still, shrouded in silence. Broken weapons and empty armor marked the last stand of the would-be conquerors, now relics of their own hubris. The forest around the clearing was untouched, save for the dim traces of smoke that had begun to lift, leaving only the whisper of cool earth reclaiming its peace. The wind carried no voices, no footsteps, only quiet. The battle was over, and the victor had already disappeared into the shadows. Far above the charred ground, aboard their flagship orbiting Earth, the remaining alien officers watched in stunned silence. They had witnessed the breakdown of all communications, the haunting pauses between calls that ended with static, the stark realization of total defeat. On their screens, they saw only a forest, calm and indifferent, swallowing the aftermath of the fight. In their minds, the story replayed, a single figure, a mere human, standing against their strongest forces and leaving nothing but a silent warning. Their scanners detected no heat signatures, no heartbeat, only the empty stillness of a world that had resisted without effort. One by one, the officers turned to their commander, who sat frozen at the helm, his face drained of color. The truth settled around them, impossible to ignore. This planet, which they had considered an easy conquest, had crushed them with something more powerful than fire or force. They had come to conquer and left as ghosts, marked forever by an enemy they hadn't understood. Earth wasn't just defended, it was alive, its people fierce, resilient, and unwilling to surrender. A lieutenant broke the silence, voice strained with disbelief. "How can a single human defeat an army? It defies reason." But even he knew the answer, felt the weight of it in his own voice. There was no room for reason in what they had witnessed. Earth had revealed a truth that no scanner, no weapon could detect, the strength to defend what it valued, the power to turn silence into a blade. The commander, his face set in grim acceptance, gave the order for retreat. It was a single word, one that had never before passed his lips. As the engines hummed to life, preparing to pull away from Earth's orbit, the alien fleet turned, its once proud vessels now casting long shadows over the world that had quietly beaten them. They had no parting words, no promises of revenge. This battle had ended with more than their failure. It had ended with a story they would carry back to their people, a story of Earth and the lone warrior who had stopped them in their tracks. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, the ninja emerged from the shadows. His task complete, he walked quietly, his movements blending with the rhythm of the forest. Leaves crunched softly under his feet as he passed through the trees, returning to the silence that was as much a part of him as the air he breathed. He moved without hesitation, a guardian who knew he had fulfilled his duty. He paused on a hill overlooking the forest, watching as the faint glint of the alien fleet vanished beyond the horizon. They would leave Earth as they had come, with the same silence that had marked their approach. But now, that silence had a different weight. It was no longer the silence of arrogant conquerors. It was the silence of defeated trespassers, a warning carried across the stars. The ninja lowered his gaze, calm and steady, feeling the ground beneath his feet, rooted in the land he had defended. He was not the first of his kind, nor would he be the last. His people had protected this world in their own ways, through the quiet resilience that ran as deep as the roots of the trees around him. He had simply answered a call, stepping into a role as old as the land itself. As he turned to leave, a small group of humans emerged from the trees, villagers who had watched the sky in fear as the alien ships had landed. They approached him slowly, hesitating, as if unsure whether he was a spirit or a man. His face remained hidden, shadowed by his hood, but his presence calmed them. They had sensed the battle, had felt the tremors in the earth and seen the flashes in the distance, but now, seeing him, they understood. A child stepped forward, her eyes wide with wonder. "Are they gone?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper. The ninja nodded, a slight tilt of his head, and the child's face broke into a relieved smile. She reached out, a gesture of gratitude, and he knelt down, letting her place a small, trembling hand on his shoulder. The others watched, their fear giving way to admiration, to quiet awe. He rose, giving them a slight bow, an unspoken promise that their world was safe, that their peace would remain undisturbed. The villagers watched as he disappeared back into the forest, the dark folds of his cloak blending seamlessly with the trees. They knew they would not see him again, but his presence would linger, a protector in the shadows, a guardian who asked for nothing in return. And as they turned to go, Each of them carried a piece of his courage, a quiet understanding that Earth was their home and would always be worth defending. Days later, the story spread, traveling from village to village, town to town. Whispers of the lone ninja who had stood against an alien army grew into tales of Earth's silent warrior, the one who had defended them without needing a single ally. And with every retelling, the legend grew, a warning and a promise etched into the hearts of every human who heard it. Earth, they realized, was not a place that could be taken. It was a place that defended itself, a place where even the quietest warrior could stand alone and turn back the strongest foe. Far across the galaxy, in alien courts and military councils, the tale of Earth's silent defender spread as well. It reached ears that once heard only whispers of conquest, spreading unease among those who had once seen Earth as nothing more than another target. To them, the story became a haunting reminder, a cautionary tale of a world that refused to be tamed, of a warrior who moved without sound but left a silence that echoed through the stars. And so, the legend of the lone ninja became more than a story. It became a shield, an unbreakable vow whispered in the quiet of night by those who understood its meaning. Earth would not yield. Not to might, nor to numbers, nor to the arrogant claims of those who believed it could be taken. In the years that followed, when new threats looked upon Earth from afar, they hesitated. They remembered the silence that had met the last intruders, the silence that had followed their retreat, the silence that had guarded a single world with unwavering resolve. And in that silence, they found their answer, an answer as deep and unyielding as the land itself. Earth would always be defended, even if only by a single, silent soul.